Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Occasionally I like to try a book outside the norm. This was a special request, so it came at the right time. But before we get into the book, let's go over the usual. First, the views expressed here are my own. I encourage everyone to pick up a copy and read it for themselves. What I like, others may not, and vice versa. Second, if you like what I do or the reviews I make, please like, share, and subscribe. Third, if you'd like to critique my own work, I'll leave a link in the description. I welcome all comments and criticism. And fourth, I'm running an art contest. I should have the official details out this evening. I'll link the video containing the rules and examples below. The prize will be one of 3 $200 commissions, and the contest is open November 1st and runs through December 15th. If you would like to enter, or you know somebody who would like to enter, please link them the video below. With all that out of the way, let's get into Vengefully Yours. As I said, this was a special request, as I normally don't cover romance or noir. I've nothing against the genre, but it's not where I like to go. It's refreshing to try something new, even if it's far from my comfort zone. Since this is a collection of short stories, I can't do a proper recap. What I can do is give a small synopsis of each of the 6 short stories, and I'll keep them brief to avoid spoilers. First up is Angel of Lasai. A former criminal turned armed security talks of his time in an underground casino and the struggles of the underworld. In the dead of the night, a mysterious man has been stalking a young woman for years. Her connection to his past and his crimes are a mystery. Behind the 8 Ball. A former Navy SEAL turned mechanic has a run-in with an old flame. She needs his help, but all he wants is for her to go away. Stark Homecoming. A man seeks out his high school girlfriend to reveal his dark past. She wants nothing to do with him. At first. The Nightmare. Secret agent spy thriller. Someone's killed a famous investigator, but who? And lastly, A Fool to Hold You. An undercover detective gets too involved with a mobster's fiancée. Drawn in by the woman with connections to the highest level of corruption, what can he do to escape? Does he even want to? I tried to put a bit of flair onto the recaps. This isn't my sort of thing, but I try to find something to like in everything I read. Speaking of likes, let's get into them. So this book was a grab bag for me. And while I have issues with it, I'd like to cover what I enjoyed from the book first. First of all, every story is intense. I don't mean by what's going on. The writing, the pace, the atmosphere, it all feels like a black and white detective movie from the turn of the last century. The stories are very short, each taking about an hour to read, but each one raises your pulse with its presentation. This has more to do with how well the book is written rather than the subject matter. I do have to comment on how well this is written. There's almost no wasted words. Each line gives you just enough information without the prose feeling cluttered. It's fast-paced with a very smooth flow. The choice of words is perfect. As far as prose go, there's nothing that pulled me out of the story. Individually, each of the stories feel like the dramatic setup to a larger story. Something like the end of a first or second act. You get the feeling like the climax of a big movie is just around the corner. I have mixed feelings about this, but generally I enjoyed the energy. My biggest like has to be the atmosphere. I wasn't lying when I said every story feels like it was pulled out of an old black and white detective drama. The atmosphere is thick enough to cut. No matter what the story says to the contrary, I can feel the rain, smell the cigarette smoke, and hear a single sad saxophone lamenting the state of the city. This is helped along by a fantastic narration in the audiobook. I imagine if you like this atmosphere, you're going to be walking into the coziest of comfort zones. I wanted to focus on my positives first because all in all, this book has great presentation, structure, and execution. Technically, I can't find any real problems with it, but I did have some problems with it. My dislikes are going to focus on the personal rather than the technical, but there are a few things that would have improved it for me. That being said, this isn't my genre. This book made me feel like it was the early 2010s and I just let YouTube play while I took a nap, only to come back and find it on the weird side. This book wasn't made for me, and I want to clarify that before I get into the weeds. So let's get into the weeds, or more accurately, the rails. Despite my synopsis, most of these stories were very one-track. They all start out different, but with the possible exception of the first, they all end in the same place. It's passion, romance, and forbidden love in one flavor or another. At times, it's like watching all the big love scenes in movies from different eras, all told in the gritty 1950s cop drama narration. By the third story, I pretty much knew where it was all going. Usually. There are a few adult moments that caught me completely off guard. I mean that seriously, like I stopped cold, took in what I just heard, and started the story over to make sure I didn't miss anything. I suppose it's a credit to the author that it actually made me uncomfortable because I've read some stuff. They weren't crass. In fact, I'm amazed that such plain language did what it did. Either way, it was jarring, and it did pull me out of the story, for a short while. Speaking of things that come out of nowhere, when I started this book, I thought from the atmosphere, the prose, and the way the characters were presented that this was all set pre-1950s. I was thrown for a loop the first time a character pulls out a smartphone or something else modern makes itself known. Perhaps I missed some important context at the beginning of these chapters because I did notice later that a chapter started with a date, though I don't remember earlier chapters doing that. Either way, the modern stuff feels out of place. From the out of place to the completely expected, there are several things that line up to the stereotype, and I wanted to touch on those. By the end of the book, I found myself wishing for a brunette. I'm more partial to black hair myself, and would be completely out of luck in this universe because every woman has blonde hair and blue eyes. Now they're not all the same. We have representation of all the blondes. Platinum, dirty, golden, and dark. I was surprised that there was this much variety in fair hair. The same is true for the eyes, as they're all bright blue to green blue to dark blue. Don't get me wrong, a blonde-haired blue-eyed woman can stop a man cold. But it made it feel like the same woman in every story. That's despite the obvious differences between the characters. Before you go thinking I'm focusing all on the women, let's talk about the men. Every man in this book may as well be the same guy. They're all law enforcement, former military, strongman types. They all have a very similar way of talking, with the same feelings, humor, and wants. It made it hard to remember their names because they are all so similar. Now that I think about it, I can't remember a single physical description of a single one. I imagine them all as the same brooding, dark-haired man with a 5 o'clock shadow. I may be complaining about genre standard here. This all feels a bit formulaic, so let's touch on something that's not. I found myself chomping at the bit for some completion. Each story ends on a resolution or plan to do something big. It ends there. It's like watching a movie to the end of the second act and turning it off. I need some closure. I feel like I've been on a date with a pretty girl who teased me for hours and catches a cab home while I'm paying the bill. Maybe this would be solved if I checked out this author's other work and read a full story to completion. As things stand, I was promised a banquet and cut off after a single drink and a bit of appetizer. There's another thing I need to talk about. Not all the stories had this problem, but enough of them did that I need to address it. There's a lot of jumping around. This is mostly a gripe about Behind the Eight Ball, but after the first time jump, I became lost. I think the author was trying an effect that works in movies, where you take what the character wears and what they look like as visual cues to where you are, or when you are to be more accurate. In print, this is too confusing. I understood all the major plot points, but I just felt lost. The impacts of certain revelations caused confusion rather than surprise. So let's get into my thoughts. As I said, every story felt like it took place in the first half of the last century. The author's prose give that feel throughout the whole book. I imagine they'd be phenomenal with pieces set in that era, and indeed, I know at least one of them was. That being said, regardless of when they took place, it all felt like it was the 40s, 50s, or earlier. A great talent with prose, but it feels like the wrong spice with the wrong meat. It's possible the stories presented were too small for me to get the most out of them. They all felt like they belonged to something much bigger. This helped me get invested, but frustrated me at the end. The structure of the stories make them feel romantic. Everything's dramatic, there's a lot of serendipity, and everything's about love, and everybody burns with passion. As I said, the stories are too short for proper juxtaposition, and I feel they should have been a bit longer with more payoff at the end. I may be preaching to the wind because I feel like I'm reading someone's favorite genre, like it was tailor-made for an audience that I'm not only not part of, but am completely disassociated from. That being said, I'd take technical advice from this author any day, especially on drama and intensity. The tight focus and lean prose make the stories enjoyable, if not a little frustrating. But as I said before, it's refreshing to get out of your comfort zone. And with that said, I wish you all good luck.